Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Neural Magic podcast. Each week, we will explore one aspect of what makes your brain magical, how we set intentions, cast powerful spells, and use rituals to manifest. Today's topic is something that led me to research neural magic in the first place. It's about how we consider spaces to be sacred. Like, why do we enter a space and then clear it out for a ritual, and suddenly it assumes this new role of becoming sacred or magical? So how do we reframe our brain into kind of attributing sacred qualities or special qualities to a space or things that we use? So now let's explore our magical brains together. When we perform rituals or even maybe set aside a place for work, our mindset kind of changes when we enter that space. We can set boundaries, and that kind of reframes how we look at this area. Maybe you are putting a notepad out when you want to write with a pen, and when you enter and sit in that particular location, you then start to think, oh, this means that I'm going to be writing. Right now, I have a 6-year-old, and I've been setting up this areas for her homework or her writing, or kind of to set the tone that when she enters that particular location, it means that she will be doing a particular thing. I think in a lot of classroom settings, we call them zoning. So when you have like zones for doing certain activities, and you move to a different zone, and that zone is set for a different activity. So when you enter these spaces, your brain then starts thinking, okay, this is what I'm meant to be doing. The same thing works for creating things where you are kind of getting into the zone for a ritual, or a zone for manifesting something spiritually. This is something that happened a lot when I was growing up. We used to have rituals maybe every year, definitely every year, probably more often than that. And one thing that we did usually on the night before the ritual was we would take the dining table and move it to a different location and move all the chairs, and then we would clean the floor really well, and then use the rice flour to make a particular design on the floor, and then we would either place bricks or a concrete slab on the rice flour design, or the column as we call it, and then that would be where the ritual fire would be invoked. And suddenly that particular dining room, which is normally associated with eating or drinking or conversations, has now become transformed into a place where you'll be invoking a fire, where you'll be invoking gods and goddesses or other kinds of deities to come into the space. And it assumes this role of sacredness, which did not exist before and wouldn't exist once we cleared everything off again. And even the objects we place there in that particular space, so the bricks which are just normally lying outside, and now that they're inside the house on the column, which is the design made with the rice flour, now the bricks have assumed this role of becoming this conduit for a sacred fire or a sacred ritual. So even the objects placed within this particular space assume a new meaning. So how is this possible? Like, what's going on within us that's allowing us to reframe all of this? In next week, I'll probably talk more about objects and kind of how objects get reframed. Like, how does a piece of wood become a wand, or how does a piece of crystal assume certain powers, and how our beliefs and our essences transfer into objects. So we'll talk more about objects assuming different spiritual and sacred significance next week. But this week, we're going to talking more about spaces. One big aspect of space, creating sacred spaces, is creating boundaries. And we might do this with something physical, like I told you about drawing a kolam or with a rice flower. In a lot of ceremonies which I've witnessed, they use grass as a way to demarcate like this particular area within this grass boundary is something that is sacred. A lot of rituals in different cultures use sprinkling of water as a way to kind of encircle or demarcate a particular thing, or anointing specific walls of a location and then kind of sealing it off as this is now a sealed off boundary. And when I went to a school, and I mentioned it before, I went to an Anglo-Vedic school, and where we regularly performed fire rituals every Saturday, and we would invoke the fire, as we said, and we sat around and chanted. And one of the first mantras we would do when we were invoking the fire was Om Adite Numanyasva, Om Anumate Numanyasva, Om Saraswatyanumanyasva, Om Deva Savita Prasuva Yajna Patim Bagaya Divyo Gandharva Ketabumat. And so this one, when you said the first line, we would use water and sprinkle water along the south side. And then with the second line, we would sprinkle water along the west side. And then with the third line along the north side. And then create a boundary with the last line along all four sides, kind of earmarking that we are inviting different deities to witness this particular fire or ritual that we are invoking, and that's causing the that particular to kind of bring wisdom, to bring divinity, to bring meaning to this particular ritual that we were going to perform. This demarcation with water is essentially invisible because once you demarcate it, there's nothing to be seen, but yet everybody knew this boundary was created and that it existed. Where is this process? So if you run your hand along the top of your skull, the very top of your skull, in this, if you're watching a video, you can see I'm wearing headphones. You kind of the top of the headphones if you're wearing them, and then kind of come down almost to where your skull is almost sloping off and kind of falls towards your ears, but right at that edge before it slopes down to your ears, that would be your parietal cortex. And that's kind of a very spatial area of your brain that is really important in recognizing boundaries and allowing the division between the inside and the outside, and what is considered to be inside the sacred boundary and outside the sacred boundary. I mentioned sacred boundary, but it's pretty much true for any kind of boundaries you are perceiving with your brain. So the parietal cortex is really important. In some instances, when we are in the space of, say, a ritual, or you might be in working and you might be in the zone, like doing your writing, or you might be working on a piece of art and you might just have a complete dissolution of sense of space and time. And for that, you need to activate your memory systems in your hippocampus. The hippocampus is located in your temporal lobe. So if you kind of place your hands at the top of your ears and kind of dive deep inside, that would be a good location for you to think about the hippocampus and the temporal time, the loss of sense of space and time that happens within this when you set these boundaries is because of changes in your hippocampal system, where you might just be doing something for 5 minutes but feel like hours have passed. And this might be something that you experience in a ritual setting as well. A big thing is to kind of invoke that sense of sacredness or salience to what you're doing. So why does this space assume certain significance in your brain? And for that, you almost have to shift context as to what this particular location is associated with it. So we talked about the dining room, and the dining room no longer being a dining room, but a ritual space. And this, for this, you're using your anterior cingulate cortex. This part of the brain is actually telling you, hey, okay, in this time, this is the context, and we are switching modes and to where this is going to be a ritual space, or this is going to be a workspace or a creative space. So your anterior cingulate cortex is going to really help you with that. To kind of imagine where that location is, if you place the palm of your hand against the curvature of your skull, so with the base of your palm right against the top of your forehead, and gently slip down your hand through your skull to the top of your brain, and sink down a little bit more along the curve of your hand, of your palm. That would be your anterior cingulate cortex, and that part is the one that's creating salience or importance to a particular thing that you're doing. The other important area of the brain that's creating salience is your amygdala, which is attaching emotional tags to what you're doing. So, if I'm doing this particular thing, or when I'm entering this space, I'm feeling safe, or I'm feeling anxious, or sometimes when you enter a particular location, immediately you feel a certain sense of heaviness or the gravitas of the situation. And that's because your amygdala is being activated to kind of feel and tag that particular location with, I'm entering an important space and this is making me feel this. So that is something you experience with the amygdala. And another aspect of entering spaces is we are also reimagining our roles within these spaces. And for example, one big thing that happens in some of these rituals that we do is there are these protocols that you follow, right? You might wear a robe, or you might cleanse your hands before you go in, or like for example, when I walk into my lab, one of the first things that I do is I wash my hands, and then I assume this role, this lab space is assuming this role of a scientist. There are certain rules associated with entering my lab space. You have to tie your hair back. You have to wear lab coat. Or you have to wear full sleeve shirts and closed-toed shoes. So it is important for personal protection physically, but it's also giving you a mental change as to I'm walking into the space of a particular importance, and therefore my role in this space is also going to be different than when I'm just outside the door, outside the lab. And it's also kind of also going to follow up in some of the actions that you do within that space. So I might not label bottles or spices in my house, which my partner begs me to do. But when I'm in the lab, I'm very conscious of the fact that I have to label bottles and beakers and anything that I have. So there's a certain amount of care that goes in when you walk into that particular space. So similarly, in the ritual space, at least in some Indian rituals, one thing you're supposed to do is bind your hair and kind of put it into a knot. And as you're doing it, you're kind of taking all the mundane worries and everyday worries and putting them into a knot and setting them aside, so that when you're approaching the ritual or the act itself, those things are not going to affect you. You're only going to be worried about everything that's in front of you, the protocol that you're following for the particular magic or for the particular ritual, and everything else is set aside. So the space kind of creates this milieu, and you're assuming this new self as you're walking in. And for this, we're using our, the default mode network, which is your sense of self. So we are kind of activating how we perceive ourselves in a different fashion within this location. I was going to say new location, but it's not. It's like just the renewed contextual of that particular location. And finally, one of the main things that we do is we are creating intention, right? So whether you're working on a lab experiment, whether you're in a ritual space kind of manifesting something, you are also saying, in this space, I can accomplish this. I wish to conduct a successful experiment. I wish to investigate this, or I wish to create magic, or I wish to manifest my goals. So when you're entering this space, you are also setting a very powerful intention. And for this, we're using our prefrontal cortex, which is really important, which is kind of, if you just place your hands along your temples and kind of come towards your front of your forehead. That would be your prefrontal cortex, which you're using for setting those intentions. One thing about a lot of what I've talked about right now is how a person who's involved in the ritual or entering this space, how it affects their own brain. So me entering the lab, me entering a ritual space with a sacred fire, me coming into the dining room and reimagining what it looks like. But it is what they found is in studies is that even people who are not aware of what the ritual is or what this particular setting is, the minute they enter or see this space with the boundary, whether it be physical or invisible boundary, they know that I'm here and that's there, and there's something beyond me that I'm not either supposed to step over the threshold, or I'm when I step into that location, something has changed. So even people who are not participants in the actual ritual or have not been invited into that particular area recognize the importance of that particular boundary. And that one, when we see a boundary being drawn, we are creating that us versus them kind of difference. And we use our superior temporal sulcus and the temporoparietal junction. So if you kind of go along the tops of your ears and right above that, if you kind of look at the brain areas right above the tippy tops of your ears, that would be areas where you're looking at the temporoparietal junction. And if you're looking from your temples to the top of your ears, you'll be looking at your superior temporal sulcus. So it's kind of a groove in the brain along your temporal lobe, and that's what we're looking for. And those areas are stimulated when we are looking into a boundary and recognizing that I'm not engaging the ritual, but I still know that something is going on. And a lot of this is been found in theater audiences where there's a separation. In some theaters, the performers literally create an invisible barrier. They might either draw a screen or create like a little line between the audience and the performers, and so the audience knows, okay, this is not a space I can step into, and something else is happening on the other side. And that kind of perception is noticed even in those kinds of theatrical spaces. So we really have these amazing circuits within us that helps us recognize sacredness or importance and ritualistic spaces, and to reimagine areas around us as being sacred or non-sacred. And it's really important for us to set aside something and tell our brains constantly that this is going to be where I have my altar. This is going to be where I perform my rituals. This is going to be where I perform my homework or readings, or and kind of give it that importance. And that allows your brain to also have a particular salience with it, which allows you to have more power for your intentions and manifestation going forward. So I hope that was interesting for you. Feel free to email me or on Instagram, or let me know what you do for your own sacred spaces, and that'll be a really good conversation that we can have. You can follow me on Instagram at Sidbits, SIDDBITS, or YouTube at Brain Mystic. You can also subscribe to the podcast and join the mailing list. The book, The Neuroscience of Tarot, is out now, and The Neuroscience of Magic will be out in the fall of 2026. And a lot of these discussions on this podcast are based on that particular book. For more, please go to brainmystic.com or siddharthramakrishnan.com. I will see you again soon. Bye.